On today's More Than a Test, we welcome Frank Esposito. Frank is the superintendent of a small district called Washington Borough in New Jersey. But he's had like this crazy story about how he ended up where he is. He's been to Qatar, he's been all over the Northeast. But more importantly, he shares his story of what it was like to try to become a superintendent and includes something like 50 interviews that did not go his way. This is a really inspiring conversation with a super innovative leader, and I'm so glad you're here on More Than a Test. Hey, Frank, thanks for being here.
Hi, Laura. How are you today?
I'm great. It's a Friday morning, and you're joining me from Washington Borough, which is a small district, right, in New Jersey. Am I right about that?
It is. That's correct. We're in northwestern New Jersey.
Tell me a little bit about your district.
So Washington Borough has about 575 students. We are one of five feeder schools, K-6 schools that go to a larger regional high school district, middle school, high school district. In Warren County, New Jersey. So a little bit more of a suburban rural effect. We do have quite a few students and families that are of lower income in this area, which is a bit different for some of the other feeder schools that go to the same middle school, high school. So we do have some challenges, but great place to be and has lots of history for the region in this area. So we have the very first school in the greater area here, which is now our primary school, preschool K and 1 school. So we were founded in 1874. And I only know this, not for the show. I only know this because we're redesigning our website. And so we were doing some research on it.
Well, that's really great. So you have your schools are split up, and there's a primary school with K1, 2, and then how does it split for the rest of the district?
So it used to be a K1, 2. It is because our preschool is growing so much. We are a preschool through 1 school and then a 2 through 6 school. So we have two schools.
And what's the thought on splitting those two?
Oh yeah. So originally years ago, they were 2 K-6 schools that because there were some disparities between resources and populations on each side of town, they went to a different model, which was to educate the younger students in one and the older students in the other. The break point just happened to do with space. It wasn't really much of an educational thought necessarily, but I think it would make more sense if we replaced it.
All right, I'm going to make you feel a lot better. I once did an episode with the founder of a coding platform. I was sick the whole way through. It took us 2.5 hours to record just from all of my coughing. So you're going to be fine. But so I went out to New Jersey with Amira a few months ago, and I learned a couple of things. I hadn't been out into like the suburbs and the more rural area. The first thing that I learned is when you ask them where to go to lunch, they all say you should go to a diner. Is that true in your area too, that there's a bunch of diners and that's where people go for lunch?
Yeah, Washington Diner is right down the street, and it looks like your traditional diner. It's all the traditional dressings of what diners should look like. So
you're like the last place in the world. We don't have that in Colorado, and the menus are extensive, right? They've got everything under the sun on the menu. So
7-page menu, and all you do is go in and get a grilled cheese and disco fries anyway. So no need for the menu.
That's a good tip for next time. Okay, the other thing that I learned, I did not expect suburban or rural New Jersey to be as diverse as it was when I went to go visit. They had kids from all over the world, different countries. Is that true in your little district as well?
It is. I think we're a bit unique for our cluster, but we certainly do. We have an influx of all different cultures in our small little district. Certainly different socioeconomic statuses, and much more diverse than I had expected, quite frankly, because Warren County is historically known as less diverse. And so I was very happy to encounter this district when I was interviewing with the board.
Okay, and so then is that new for your district? I feel like what I'm hearing is that maybe this is kind of a newer thing where there are kids coming from other places and different languages coming into the district. Is that true?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say we have a significant number of second language students. I know that we don't, but we certainly have enough culture here where it's more diverse for the greater Warren County area. And so because this at one time, this Washington Borough was a through passageway for any kind of commerce that was going on in Northwest New Jersey. So um, it has an actual center of town, which many towns out here don't. A walking center of town with storefronts and what used to be a railroad that took you from it could take you all the way across the state. So in that regard, it's a walking town, and we don't have any busing in our town, as a matter of fact. So um, because of that, I think that um, you're going to find a lot more of the rentals where you folks can rent a house and walk a couple blocks to work in a more of a essential kind of worker perspective.
It's interesting you bring up that you don't have buses. I didn't know that about you because something that's come up from a lot of the large city districts is that transportation is so expensive and hard to staff. It's almost impossible in some of our large city districts. But I'm sure with your funding, there are some other things that are hard with being a small district and needing and having diverse needs of students. Tell us a little bit about how you make decisions and priorities when you're budgeting where you're at.
It is. So uniquely, we are actually in very good condition with our budget. And that mainly does have to do with the fact that we do not have busing, so we're not required because we're a smaller town to have busing. But secondly, we've been funded by the state for our preschool education, and so we have a significant portion of our budget that pays essentially for the entire preschool program, and we benefit from that obviously because we get students in program earlier, especially students that may not have the resources that other students might have, can be exposed to literacy at an early age, whereby they might not have those resources in their home. So we're very lucky in that regard. The amount of staff that we have is low in comparison in terms of the amount of areas that are out of classroom staff handles. And so because of that, the budget has not really been utilized to the extent that it can. So we've been running at a surplus here for a couple of years, and most of that surplus has been used to do capital projects of our historically old building, which is Taylor Street School. So we do not have that issue at the moment. But as we expand our staff and I'm starting to build infrastructure here, certainly we will at some point. We've been running at about a 750 surplus per year.
Wow, congratulations. I feel like with the exception of ESSER funds, we don't hear that very often. And so that must feel
ESSER
really good
funds,
for
yeah,
you.
certainly. ESSER funds helped because we were able to obviously infuse some of that into some of the infrastructure before I got here. Some of the capital improvements were already done with the ESSER funds, and in the scope of what it was allowed to be used for. But yeah, I think we're still good, well positioned to go forward the next few years as we build capacity. That'll shrink because as having educators here with benefits and so forth, that's a large significant portion of the budget. So as we increase that, it'll shrink some.
And do you have trouble finding educators out where you are? I know I don't think there's a superintendent that I haven't talked to that hasn't said that staffing is probably their biggest issue.
Yeah, so I've only been here since August, so most of the staff was already in place. We have had a couple of teachers that have left for different reasons. Um, you know, it's harder to fill a maternity position anyway. So I don't know if that's a great gauge. I think I'll get a better sense when that hiring season comes up in just a few months. But I can say that being from New Jersey and as a director of curriculum, it was very difficult to find staff at my previous district, and we had positions that were vacant for entire years, that were never filled. So as a matter of fact, one of my LinkedIn posts is that the hiring crisis is real, and we were offering anyone with a college degree tuition reimbursement to come in and do alternate route, and we would sponsor the whole way through with no cost to the employee, and we still only received one applicant for that specific post.
Oh my gosh, that is crazy. It reminds me when I used to live in Houston, Texas, and there used to be these huge billboards that said, "Want to teach? When can you start?" And it was kind of the same concept of really just trying to get people in the door because I can't believe only one post. So that's amazing. Frank, one of the things that I feel like I've already learned about you in the short time I've known you is that you're like a pretty innovative guy. Like they're very like outside the box thinking. And a little bit, we're going to talk about your experience in the Middle East. And I don't think small districts are really known for that, at least from my experience. How are you kind of expressing your like entrepreneurial spirit and your interest in innovation in your small district?
Well, thank you for that lead up. I would say that I was very lucky. I was interviewing for superintendencies for probably about 3 years since I got back to the Middle East. When I returned back to the district that I left, which was very innovative in and of itself. It's a magnet school district, is for lack of a better term. And so I came back and took a consultant job there, knowing the superintendent, and she supported me and knew that I was interviewing for superintendencies. And it turned into a more permanent job because of COVID and other reasons. But that whole time I was really interviewing for superintendencies. And the board that interviewed me here, I think they were just ready for something to inspire the district. And I think in small towns like this, you have a lot of history and it's rich and it's fulfilling and it makes you feel comfortable and cozy. But I think that the board members that were interviewing me were just ready for like the next phase of what the borough can offer. And, there's a new town manager who's doing some really cool things with a redevelopment plan. And I think I just kind of fit into what they were looking for. I was, when looking for a superintendency, I was kind of hand selecting for a while, but I was really just looking to connect with what the board was looking for and hoping that I would eventually find that board that can connect with, like you said, my entrepreneurial spirit and my desire to always want to be innovating in the education space. And so I found that here, and I feel very fortunate for that, and we're on our way. So good things to come here in the borough.
I love that you shared, and I want to dial into that in a little bit, but that you shared that it was 3 years of interviewing, because I think for a lot of us, it looks like people who want to lead, like show up and all the stars align and it's like a halo over their head or something. And for you, it sounds like it was a little bit of a journey and really about finding the right place at the right time. Right. And so it wasn't just the district, it was also the district is ready for you right now. Does that sound about right?
Oh, so accurate. I applied for about 50 positions. I interviewed for about 12 or 13. I have these records somewhere. I got to the final stages with 8, where I was either the runner up or the top 3. And I finally got this position. And every job that I didn't get was the right decision. And
Yeah.
so it only feels right when you finally got that position. But when I was still looking, it was horrifying. I had this great track record everywhere that I had gone. I made a great impact on school districts. I had this international experience that others didn't have. And I was a change of career path. I was a teacher in multi levels, worked for Grant Wiggins for many years as a consultant. And so my resume was full. I had no problem thinking that I was a great candidate, but it's not about that. It's about what are the town's goals, and what are the board, how are the board's communicators of those goals for the town, and then how do you fit into that? And so, like I said before, like it really is about fit. And we used to talk about that in the international circuit quite a bit, like just trying to find the right fit teacher for the job as well. And, it's hard to say, don't be upset if you don't get this job. It's not that you're not very valuable, in the industry or, you don't have great skills, but every position, every town is really looking for something at a point in time. And that just happened to meet, for me at this time. So.
Luckily, we have Matt. At some point, if you ever get to meet Matt, he is amazing. The things that he has done for me with our podcast, a million times over. So you're going to be great. But you were telling me about your mom was let's go back there. So your mom had been a 25-year professor.
Right. So I was in finance, corporate finance, working for PepsiCo and looking for kind of a life change. And my mom was teaching a local She was a professor at a local college, and she said, well, why don't you just come and check out one of my classes? There are a lot of people that are changing careers. It's a small cohort. And I did. And of course, she was an amazing teacher. Um, and really, it influenced me to become a teacher. I really had no desire to do it. Just the interaction that I saw, and kind of, there were people in their 30s, 40s, and 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 they just had such like this new inspiration that you could see. And coming out of finance, I was really looking for something that was, you know, helping people. I really, that's what I was looking for. And so whether it was law or helping community through law or through education, I didn't really care what it was going to be. And I just wanted to kind of find that niche. And I found it pretty quickly in that environment. And so I quit my job. I moved back home. My mom was my professor for 2 different classes. I got A's in both of those classes.
Aw.
But I did have a I did have a pretty good record there. So it was consistent with my other scores. So it was a great experience. And while in that experience, I was able to become a paraprofessional. And so I went from being in corporate finance to being a teacher aide in a small school district, not much different than this one that I'm in currently.
That is so inspiring. I actually only asked the finance question because what it reminded me of is when I first started leading schools, my husband, it works in finance. He stayed the corporate finance route. He didn't start becoming a teacher. But I remember coming home and being like, I'm in charge of this budget now. And I have no idea what I'm even looking at. And we hear this all the time from leaders. So you even had that on your resume of like, the budget would make sense to you. The finance stuff makes sense to you. And you still had this long road to becoming a superintendent. I know that you say that every no was like really getting you to your yes, but was there any that like really hit you hard that you were like, I thought this was it and it wasn't?
Oh, wow. That's a question that evokes some emotion. So yeah, there were 2 actually, and only because I know in the aftermath, that it was really quite close. One of them was my very first superintendent interview. And I was a director of special services in a rather large district. And, we had done some really good things. We'd gotten some public recognition from that. And so I was kind of young. It was like kind of a hot commodity at the time. And I interviewed for K-12 multicultural district, which just seemed like perfectly aligned with my goals and what I wanted to do. And I came right down to the end, and of course I didn't get it. And that kind of led to my international experience, believe it or not.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, it did. And so that kind of hit me hard. I knew that from others who my mentor for my superintendency license happened to be in that same county, and so he knew that I was really close, and I was the runner up, and so that kind of hit hard, and that kind of got me on the road to knowing that I can do it, and so I was seeking that a little bit more at the time, and just kind of going along, and I wound up taking another job, and I thought that being in special education kind of held me back a little bit because I didn't have that perceived, well-rounded experience yet. And so I took a principalship not long after that at Union County Vocational Technical Schools, which is not what you might think from the title. It's more of a magnet school for highly academic students.
Oh,
In New
interesting.
Jersey, it's quite a phenomenon here, and selective enrollment. It much ran like a private school, quite frankly, where you had the highest students in the county of Union that were coming to pursue a specific vocation. The principalship that I was in was for students that were interested in being engineers, and so that was a really amazing experience there. Through working there, I formed some relationships and wound up opening my eyes to an international experience, which lo and behold became something that I wound up doing. So
Well, tell us about that. So, okay, so you were at this vocational school for engineers, which again, like I think that's so great that you went from special education to these really academic children who have plans and goals, and then this experience in Doha comes up. Tell us about that.
Right. So I'm at Magnet High School. I'm the principal, and I was also concurrently working for Grant Wiggins at Authentic Education, training different districts on UBD. And so it was Martin Luther King Day, which is about to come up. And I was doing a professional development down in Bordentown, New Jersey. And my colleague, so I did the math science, and my colleague was doing the ELA social studies. And she had just come back from Dubai. And so I said, "Oh, Dubai, where's that?" And she said, "Well, it's in the Middle East. Frank, I know that you have this kind of uh, this air about you, like you would be open to anything." And she said, "They are looking for American administrators out there. You really should look into it." And so I said, "Oh, Hildy, that's not, I don't know." But I'm telling you, so you might be able to land a directorship, which is just like a superintendency. And so I reached out to Grant Wiggins and I said, "Hey, Grant, what do you think about international education and specifically, this region of the world? It's a little scary." And he said, "Big fan. Doha is great." I don't know if he said Doha is great yet. That was a later conversation, but he said, Middle East is great. If you're interested, speak to my daughter. And so Alexis Wiggins, who is later became an author and a very well-known educator, she had worked in Saudi, like yourself, and one of the American schools in Riyadh. I don't know what it's called, probably the American School of Riyadh, and or International School of Riyadh. And so she was a learning coach there, but she had previously worked in Doha at Qatar Academy. And so I was emailing back and forth with her. I'd done some PDs with her as well. And so my wife had no idea that I was having these conversations. So I'm going back and forth with Alexis, and I learned quite a bit about the international circuit and like how you do it and how you seek the positions and whether or not I would be a good candidate. And so one day I came home and spoke to my wife and said, "Hey, hun, I've been talking to Alexis Wiggins, and I'm interested in doing something international. Would you consider this?" And I give her the whole rundown of everything that she had said, and then and it ended in, "Well, you have to go to this job fair in Cambridge, Massachusetts." And she said, not a woman of many words. She said, "Well, we've never been to Boston together, so let's suck it out." So we have 3 children. We put them in the minivan because we don't want to tell any of our family. We drive up in a snowstorm, and it was literally 2 feet of snow compiled from weeks, of snow in that area. And we had this amazing experience where we were meeting people that were administrators all over the world that converging this one area for this job fair. And they wanted to meet with myself, my wife, and my children in the same room. And it was
Yeah.
fascinating to me. And, every administration interview that I'd been on in New Jersey was like this kind of impersonal, litany of scripted questions that you have to answer. And so I had the executive director of Qatar Academy with my 1-year-old son on his knee, talking to me about life and my goals and why I wanted to, try something like this. He didn't question my skill set necessarily. It came out in the interview eventually, but and I had my other children that were playing with cars in the conference room, and my wife is talking to the other professional, and so it just it felt right. And we took the plunge and we went for a visit in May of that year. They brought us out there, and just my wife and I. And when I landed on the plane, sorry to go in a different direction with this story, but we landed on the plane, and I learned that Grant had passed.
You know what, Julia, Raphael Baird always talks about how the people at your boardroom, and it's so funny because you're telling this story and you just keep naming people on your boardroom table, right? You talk about, Grant, obviously, but like even the woman at the beginning of the story who's like, I think you should do this. How lucky you are that she sits at your like personal boardroom and thought of you. And then your wife, though a few words, willing, I'll tell you something funny about this story is how much it parallels to my parents. So my mother applied to Aramco where my parents worked for over 20 years without telling my dad. Didn't tell him until they had to go interview. So you land in Qatar, you found out Grant is dead, has passed. I'm assuming it was just like one of those moments where kind of like the school you're at now.
Yeah,
Where it was the moment and the place at the time that it should be for you. Tell me about that.
it was. Things just seemed to all be making sense. And, we had this amazing opportunity. My wife was on board. She had just recently finished her work as a BCBA, behavior analyst.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we went to take this position. I actually did it mostly for her. We chose Qatar Academy specifically because they had a brand new state-of-the-art special education school, the first of its kind,
Oh,
called
wow.
Osage Academy. And I had drifted away from special education, but because she was getting this opportunity to work in the same school district as a behaviorist, which if you're here, you have to do like 3,000 hours to get the certification after you take the test. And she was able to work within the job because they didn't have that same certification requirement. So we had this amazing opportunity to be part of a school specifically that was really something that was quite new in the region and was really quite an amazing experience.
And incredibly rare too. I don't think that most people know that in international schools, having a special education program isn't common because they don't have to, right? They kind of run like private schools,
These are
right?
private schools. Yeah, these are private schools. So this was a private school in Qatar Academy, which is, um, it did have some funding from the country as well, but it was private. So yeah, they do not have to. And one of the initiatives of the country of Qatar was to go from a carbon-based economy to a knowledge-based economy. And so they funneled a lot of money, governmental money, into the private school systems as well, to ensure that that those that were in the private school systems that had some struggles had an environment in which they can succeed as well without having to relegate themselves to the Arabic speaking only public school systems, which they called independent schools there.
Okay. And so then tell me, how many kids were in the school that you ended up at?
Oh, I think Osage Academy had 400 and something. And so, yeah, I think it was like in the 480s, if I remember correctly. It was a
And most,
K through
go ahead.
12, K through 12 plus. So we also had a second chance high school for students that hadn't made it in the regular academy high schools. And we're doing a blended learning program that we started. We actually were awarded for having an innovative program in the country of Qatar for this program.
That's okay. Most of the kids were Qatari or from where?
So in that specific school, they were all Qatari.
Okay, great.
At the other academies, it was mainly regional, students from the Middle Eastern region, but they were international schools. And there were some students that were, students of faculty that also went to those schools. But one of the great benefits of Qatar Foundation was that they funded your children's schools. If you were teaching or an administrator, you were permitted to use the funding toward any school in the country, which is extremely rare. Typically, in an international setting, your children would have to go to school where you work. That's one of the benefits. But that's what made that also appealing to us at the time.
Okay. And so then you go over there, you have like what, a 1 or 2 year old son. And how long did you stay in Qatar
No, we had 3 children.
at that time? Oh, so the 1 year old was your youngest.
The 1 year old was the youngest, and we had an incoming first grader. So the oldest one went to the American School of Doha, and the younger two went to the preschool, like kind of a preschool and a preschool within Qatar Academy. So what was your other question?
How long were you there?
Oh, so we were there for 4 years, 4 school years, from 15 to 19. And our children, two of them went to the American School of Doha, and the last one we left right when it was time for him to go to kindergarten.
Wow. And I'm sure also just like caught COVID at the same, but came back just in time for COVID
We
too.
came back just in
Um,
time for COVID. And, we were only home for maybe 6 or 8 months or whatever it was. And, of course, we start acclimating ourselves and COVID hits, and then no one's intermingling anymore. And so we felt very isolated because there's a transition period coming back from international to begin with, repatriating. And so we were going through that, and then COVID hits, and we felt extremely isolated. And I started looking for international positions again during COVID, and was offered one, a directorship, which would have been in Qatar as well. And we wound up not being able to go because of all the state agencies were working slowly, and our paperwork just never made it to the finish line. And so we kind of backed out and stayed. But yeah. So.
wow. So one of the things that I just noticed about you as you're telling this story is you come alive talking about doing the things that other people aren't doing, right? You're talking about the special education program or this second chance high school, which to me is just so, like unique in the Middle East. It's unique in international schools. It's unique in private schools. And now you're at this tiny district that is like steeped in history and have been around for a long time. I'm just curious, like how do you like bring out what makes you alive in a district like the one you're in now?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think I learned as an administrator internationally, which I brought back with me, was to really embrace the people that you work with. And as you know, as an international person, typically you live in the same community as the people that you work with. And so you have no choice but to embrace the personal lives of the people that you work with, which was really a gift that I had learned internationally that I wanted to bring back with me. And so I became much more of an interconnected leader. Um, and so while here, um, yes, the people that were working here, that are currently working here, have not been exposed to some of the technologies and, progressive practices that I might have been exposed to. But what I learned really quickly was that it wasn't simply because they were averse to learning. It was just that it wasn't presented to them. And we have the most enthusiastic staff here. We have a team of folks that are working on 5 different projects at once. Luckily, of course, unfortunately, but luckily, I walked into some really poor achievement scores that required us to create a district improvement plan within the first month that I got here. And so that being the impetus for change in and of itself, like we had to do it.
Right.
That was requiring we did this. So although it's not a turnaround school like some schools, there was a pretty significant dip. And so, I had brought some, innovative programs to other districts. And so all the ears were listening. And so it was just kind of like the right time, the right place for people to think, well, why haven't we done these things? And what do we need? And what's the infrastructure? And so we started building these committees that are now talking about those things on a bi-monthly basis. And I'm putting content in front of them for things that I've used in the past, but they're doing the work and they're coming up with the suggestions to give back to me. And so
Yeah.
where it came from them, it didn't come from me.
Oh, really? I've always thought, because after reading your bio and stuff, I thought that the reason you have Amira is because you're just like this super innovative guy who's into trying new things. So whose idea was to bring Amira to your district?
The idea was mine, but the decision was theirs.
Okay.
So, what I did was I curated a bunch of research-based programs that I know work. Amira not being one of those. Amira being a little bit, taking a little bit of a leap of faith because of the technology that was involved and the research that I had done from the research that was done at Carnegie Mellon for Amira, and so we're through that process, and so I was enthralled with that, and there's another quite innovative new superintendent to the area that I had kind of gotten to know a little bit through our county roundtable meetings. And I started talking to him about this new AI product for that could potentially replace like the DRA and also has some intervention component. And, he was like, tell me about it. Like, I'm on board. So we were going down that road already. And my fear was that if I presented this to the staff and it didn't have like really solid track record of years of, getting test scores better, because that's what people want to know, right? Like, does it
Yeah.
that it would be pushed away, and quite the contrary. So we had made a decision on another software platform for our universal screening tool, and so that was already decided. But we hadn't decided on our what we were going to use for an intervention tool or learning platform. And so that's where Amira came in, and it kind of slid right into the little uh, void that we had for what we were going to do in the absence of additional staff, which we don't have yet, which will be building. We have only one interventionist in each building, and so we only serve 15 students outside of the classroom, outside of the normal flow of classroom instruction.
Right.
And so we were looking in ways like, how can we clone the teacher? Like, how can we leverage software and technology to, get an actual intervention for students while not actually having to see an additional adult. And so they were very, very interested in hearing more about that when I presented that to them.
Frank, it's funny because like on this podcast, we don't usually talk about Amira very much. We try really hard to keep it like focus on schools and on solutions, but this has been lovely for us that you wanted to have this conversation. And I think that you really are speaking to something in a couple of different ways. And I think the first thing I heard you say was, necessity is the birth of innovation, right? Like your schools just needed something to be able to offer intervention to kids who needed it. And then the other thing that I hear you saying though is that teachers are open-minded. I spend so much time in tech conversations where they're like, the teachers don't want something new. They don't want this. And I'm like, well, like which teachers are you taught, And so I would love for you to kind of speak a little bit about that, about just like your community and how you kind of grown that where you are.
Yeah. Again, tapping into my experience in the international setting, I learned a lot about the types of individuals that are willing to take chances in the classroom versus the type of training that they came from. So as you know, someone who's experienced, having folks from all over the world converging in one area or one school system, it wasn't about the training that they came from. It was about how confident they were with themselves, how well they were able to deal with stress, how flexible they were intellectually and just with, procedures. And so when you see those differences in people, the people that were most confident, most flexible, most intellectually curious, those are the people that always, obviously, they wanted to do new things. They were bringing you, ideas. And then what I learned was the more comfortable you can make someone feel that they are not going to be subject to your wrath if something goes wrong in the classroom, because that's, as a teacher, that's what I thought. Like I was going to get in big trouble if I did this and it failed, right?
Right.
Early on in my career anyway. So if you can assure folks that, and that was my introductory kind of presentation to this staff was, I want you to go and fail. Like I want you to try new things, and I want you to tell me how it failed and how you're going to pivot from that, and how you're going to do something better for our students. And if you can do that consistently and continue to learn and grow from that, our students are going to be beneficiaries of that. And so really right early on, I think that people were very comfortable with that idea. And so when you have that coming from the leader of the district, even if it wasn't there before, like people can sense that they're in a safe zone. And once you feel like you're in a safe zone, you will take chances. You are open to new ideas. And, if your life cycle is in the right place and you have enough time to devote to something, you'll do that research. You'll be part of that core team of people that are making the changes. But if they're not, and you're happy to receive them and then just run with it then, right? So like, it doesn't take a lot of out of classroom time to receive those changes and to implement them, but it does for those people that want to be part of something and do the research themselves. So, Yeah, it's a super interesting concept that I learned from just being in a different environment, different country, actually, that has really transformed how I lead in my current position, and even as a director of curriculum when I came back in my other capacity. So, thank you for asking that. That's a great.
Well, and it's been a lovely arc of your conversation today. Is that what I really feel like I've heard from you in an incredibly candid conversation is if you can share that you're okay failing, other people can feel safe failing too, or feel safe trying, right? I mean, the story that you told about what you went through to become a superintendent is so inspiring to me. And the story of like, going to your wife and being like, hey, I want to try this thing that's like way out of what anything we've ever talked about before, I think is really inspiring to me. And I'm sure opens the door for your educators to say, okay, what might it feel like if I do something different? And is this a safe zone? And it sounds like you really have created that in your district. And I think that's really special. And I appreciate you sharing it with me today. Um, this has been such a lovely conversation, but we are getting towards the end. And so I'm going to ask you the 5 questions we ask every guest to make sure that we get them here on the record with you, in addition to all of the lovely things you shared about your story. So the first question is the podcast is called More Than a Test. And Amira, we have a reason we call it that, but everyone hears something different when they hear the words more than a test. When you heard the name of the podcast, what did you think of?
Well, I wasn't sure what to expect, to be honest. I'm quite a busy guy, and I really didn't focus on any of the materials that you gave me until about 20 minutes before this call. So I didn't have many thoughts about more than a test. But now that you say it, I'll put some thought into it, and perhaps it it's a reflection of how focused we are on assessments in education, and how that really becomes the driver for better pedagogy and better experiences for students, as my story also had that dimension into it.
Right.
But I just used that to get to the end that I wanted to get to anyway. So um, I suppose I suppose that we want to focus, perhaps that the podcast is focusing more on getting to the point of the learning, rather, or talking more about the learning rather than the test and the consequences of the learning.
That's great. I love it. Tell us this a lit moment from your life. And what I mean by that is a moment of you in a book that either changed you or is your happy place or that is like a deep memory for you.
And there's a moment, and I shared this with someone right before this podcast. When I was a young learner, my sister would annoyingly always tape record my voice all the time, and I hated it. And I remember this one recording of me reading The Tortoise and the Hare, and I couldn't have been more than first grade. I couldn't imagine I was more than. And I listened to that recording so frequently as a youngster that and growing up, I remember it motivating me to want to read more because I didn't like the way I sounded reading.
Oh, wow.
And from a young age, my sister always wanted to be a teacher. So that was it was very pointed in how I still have these memories of hating the way I sounded because I wasn't as fluent as I wanted to be. Maybe that's why I became a math teacher and a finance guy. I have no idea. I'm quite a fluent reader now. But at the time, I do remember having that tremendous impact on myself. And we don't give that experience to students very often in education, at least in my experience. And so being able to offer that, the capturing of the voice in their journey of becoming more fluent, I think is something that certainly I'm very interested in.
Well, it's one of my favorite features of Amira is every time a child reads with Amira on the program, there's a recording that the teacher gets. And I will tell you, I was in a classroom recently where the teacher at the end of their reading stations, which is when they use Amira, asked who wants to be played today. And every hand, she had such a cool community of kids who wanted to learn together. Every hand goes up. They all wanted her to pick their recording to play. And then they would critique themselves in front of the whole class and be like, well, I didn't read this word right. And this is why. And like, it was really neat. And that recording is something that we've fully underestimated how beautiful and valuable exactly what you're saying it is for kids to hear themselves read. is a really special thing. I love that you say that, and really like forward thinking of your sister. All right, we got to keep going. A piece of technology you love.
A piece of technology that I love. Man, technology is everything. That it's integrated into everything that I do. Um, I'm supposed to be quick with these, right? Piece of technology that I love. You know, I am a data junkie, coming from finance. It's something that I feel good in front of a spreadsheet. It's like my de-stressor. But I really do appreciate the diagnostics that come out of a lot of the assessment tools that we're, currently, using in education. Um, so I do like a good diagnostic. I do believe that there is value in, seeing student growth within the same, standards, and understanding how that can help us to get to our next steps. But so many things that excite me about, technology and education, and AI is certainly something that's now coming into play. I once snuck I customized a little bit, but I once snuck a letter to the community out. It wasn't here. That came from ChatGPT, right after a meeting that I had with my high school honors English staff who wanted it banned from the campus. So, certainly AI is something that is, I think, here to stay, and can be very, very valuable. And it helped me in that one parent communication.
That's pretty good. I love that. I will tell you, someone just told me about using ChatGPT for master schedule, and I will tell you, it was like a weight lifting off my shoulders, thinking about all the hours I've put into master schedule, that I could go back and lead a school and not have to necessarily put that much time into it. The best advice you've ever been given, or great advice if it best is too much.
The mentor for my superintendency, my superintendent certification, was a guy named Pernell, and he's very well known in
Yeah.
Northeast now. He was my kind of guiding light when going through the process, and this many things that stuck with me. But this one very simple thing, he said, I handwrite birthday cards to every employee in my district, and you would be fascinated by how many people will just think of you differently because of that. Because you took the time to put a pen. All we do is type nowadays. You took the time to put a pen to a paper and say a little something about me. And I've done that in my superintendency. And, I have a wall right here of everyone's birthdays, and I make sure that I write a birthday card to every person. I one upped him. I put a little Ferrero Rocher on. I taped it. So, and I've gotten such amazing feedback from it. So, not very heavy in thought, but certainly something that, just a gesture can go a long way. And I think that fits in with, how I would like for people to perceive me. And I want to be part of their journey as well. So just a small tidbit. If you're an administrator, do it. You will reap the benefits from birthday cards.
I recently read an article. I think it was the CEO of GE, but I could be wrong. But he just used to write notes when he heard things across the company that were going well. And he told the story about going to Korea and being in an office there, and a guy that he had written a note to about, like, hey, I heard the numbers went up on this or something, had his note hanging up in his cubicle, and how much that meant. So I think you're really onto something about these handwritten notes. It really matters. Last question. One book you think everyone should read?
One book, what?
You think everyone should
I
read?
think everyone should read. I have several, and I jotted them down before the interview. So I'm a huge fan of the 4 Disciplines of Execution. And it's not a book about education, certainly, but as a leader, I think that there's something to be said about, the wildly important goals. Like, we all have so many goals that we focus on, and, and with too many goals, or without that really pointed focus at the things that are indispensable for the community that you're in, I think it's very easy to lose sight of where you're trying to go. And, another big portion of that is, to make sure that you have a compelling scoreboard. And so, we're in process of redesigning our website, and, if nobody knows the results of your goals except for you and your spouse, right? Like, we make sure that when we give students writing assignments, that we publish them, and that we make sure that when we have a larger audience, that raises the level of student performance. We know that that's something that's been in education forever, right? If you're doing a blog, students will write better about it. Well, if you publish the results of your goals, how much more motivating is that for teachers to put their best foot forward and to really make it something that they're proud of, and if those celebrations, if those meeting of those goals are celebrated in the community, like we celebrate sports and athletes so easily and readily, yet we don't celebrate teachers for their goals being met, or doing a great program. And I think that that book, again, it's not an education book, but it has so many great lessons about leadership and how to get people on board with really running that race and making sure that we're doing all the great things for our students.
I really love that after an episode of talking about all your failures and all the ways things didn't pan out the way you wanted, you end by saying what we need to do is celebrate our wins and make sure people have seen your winning scoreboard. And I think that's a really lovely way to tie this up. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your boardroom with us, your story with us. I'm sure Grant is, I believe at least somewhere listening and really inspired as I am. So thank you again for your time today.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on the More Than a Test podcast. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. At Amira Learning, we believe every child deserves a chance to become a reader, and we're excited to be part of this conversation. See you next week, and thanks for joining.